Surprised that Kwasi changed his mind?
No, not really. He's under a lot of pressure from his own backbenchers and from financial markets. So, as you said in the introduction, that fiscal statement's now going to be the 31st of October, Halloween. Maybe an unfortunate date to choose in the calendar, given the angst that's out there. And we've seen more of that this morning. You know, we talk about gyrations on financial markets and they sound kind of arcane and otherworldly. But this stuff really affects how ordinary people borrow and arrange their finances. So, for instance, this morning, the Bank of England has been buying more bonds. What does that mean? The Bank of England is supporting the government's borrowing in the financial markets. The government sells its own debt. They're called gilts because they used to be gilt-edged in the old days with gold to suggest that they'd be paid back. And there's no question that the government won't pay back what it owes. The question is how much investors charge the government to lend money to the government. And that rate is going up as there are more and more concerns swirling about whether or not the government, frankly, can make the sums add up. I personally think those concerns are wildly overstated, wildly overdone. But that doesn't mean that financial markets aren't sort of getting themselves in a bit of a tiz. And that's why the Bank of England this morning extended the amount of money that it's going to spend in those bond markets to try and keep a lid on those borrowing costs. But since that mini budget back on the 23rd of September, it seems like a long time now, average borrowing costs in the money markets, which then acts as a benchmark for mortgage rates and personal loan rates, tend to be slightly higher because they're not secured on a property. Those average rates have gone from like roughly 3.5% to now about 4.5%. So that's a big increase in just a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. And those increases on those money markets, these bond sales that we talk about, they ripple out right across the economy and impact people who are servicing a mortgage. If their fixed rate is coming to an end, they've got to refix at a higher rate of interest, and people on variable rate mortgages and some personal loans are variable rate as well. So this stuff, we try and explain it as well as we can. It does sound a little strange and on another planet to lots of people, but it really, really matters.
Yeah, and talk to us about what Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor's intention will be with this announcement, this fiscal plan he's unveiling on the 31st of October. Will it be to reassure the markets? Will it be to simultaneously reassure people who have investments like properties? What will be the purpose? It
will be a very political statement, but also quite a technical statement. So it will take lots of unpacking by journalists like us here on GBNews. There'll be lots of politics in it because he'll be trying to convince his own backbenchers. You know, many Tory backbenchers didn't vote for Liz Truss, and Kwasi Kwarteng is Chancellor because Liz Truss is the Prime Minister. They're politically very, very, very close. So he'll be trying to convince his own backbenchers, the media, the public in general, that they have got a firm grip of the public finances. But related to that, they'll also be trying to prove to investors across the world who invest in UK government debt, which, by the way, is one of the highest rated and most respected forms of government debt investment in the world. So let's not overstate the panic here. They'll be trying to convince them that the interest rates that they're charging the government on that debt are simply too high because they have got a plan to bring the public finances back into some sort of balance and restore some kind of order. It all hinges, Mercy, on this concept of growth, because if the government can convince everybody its policies are bold enough to get growth going, to make the pie bigger, to use a phrase that lots of people are using at the moment, then those fiscal numbers kind of take care of themselves. If you've got more going on in an economy, you raise more revenue, fewer people on benefits, job numbers stay very, very high and buoyant, unemployment stays very, very low, the government has to spend less. So it's all about restoring growth. And if Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss can convince all of us, particularly the financial markets, that their plan for growth, they're going for growth, it's really going to work, then I think in the end the markets will forgive them. But there's quite a long way, and there's a big perceptions gap at the moment between where we are now and where the government wants us to be.
And you mentioned growth, but what about spending cuts? I mean, the IFS have said that the Chancellor will have to find spending cuts of more than 60 billion if he is to meet the target to get public finances.
That's one scenario. That's one way. If they only relied on spending cuts to get the public finances back into some kind of balance that was seen to be what was correct before the mini budget. Another way would be to raise tax rates. Another way that blows tax rates and spending cuts out of the water is growth. Growth is the balm. It soothes all tensions because it just makes the pie bigger. There's more to go around. So you're right, the IFS have used that number, but that is just one scenario. If you only go down, if you put all your chips on one method of restoring the public finances. Another thing I'd say about the IFS, a very, very credible organisation. They're very good at looking at a particular tax move or a spending move and assessing how that will impact the public finances. They're less good, and they'd acknowledge this, at sort of macroeconomic forecasting, seeing the whole picture, seeing how growth interacts with currencies, interacts with international trade and so on. That's not really what they do. And the other thing I'd say is that in those IFS numbers, they're still assuming that the spending cap on energy, which is by far the most important thing the government's spending money on as per the mini budget, it could cost 100, 200 billion pounds if gas prices stay very, very high on international markets. To deliver that per unit cap will cost lots and lots of money. But if the gas price keeps coming down, and it has been coming down sharply over the last month, that's not really reflected in those IFS numbers, then the government will spend a lot less money on that energy price cap, and the public finances and the outlook for public spending will be much, much more healthy. So huge numbers of variables. I'm trying to explain them as clearly as I can, but, you know, the more you simplify it, you get to a point where you're not actually being realistic about the situation. It's a complex situation, but I would say this sort of market ferment has reared its ugly head quite quickly. It could just as easily quickly disappear.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us and bringing us that very important